So picture this. You just got a raise. A real one, not the kind where your manager sends a vague email saying, "We really value your contributions," and hands you a $200 bonus. An actual meaningful raise. Maybe five, maybe $10,000 more a year. You go home that night feeling genuinely good about yourself. You tell your partner, your roommate, whoever's around. You do a little math in your head. That's like $800 extra a month, right? Maybe you'll finally pay off that credit card. Maybe you'll put more away for retirement. Maybe you'll just breathe easier. And then a few weeks go by, then a few months, and somehow, inexplicably, your bank account looks almost exactly the same as it did before. You're not spending more on anything you can point to. You haven't gone on a trip, you didn't buy anything wild, but the money just isn't there. And you're sitting in traffic on the way home, 45 minutes of stop and go, burning gas, your back hurting from the seat, thinking, where is it all going? I've thought about this exact scenario more times than I can count. My name is Emmy, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, the psychology behind it, and why so many people work incredibly hard, earn decent salaries, and still feel like they're running on a treadmill that never quite gets them anywhere. And the thing that keeps coming up, over and over, is this quiet, invisible cost that almost nobody fully accounts for: the commute. Now, I know what you're thinking. Emmy, my commute isn't that expensive. I just drive to work. And honestly, I used to think the same thing. But here's what I want to show you today: the real, full, complete cost of commuting when you actually do the math properly. Not just the gas, not just the train ticket, the whole picture. Because when you lay it all out, the number is genuinely shocking, and more than that, it reframes the entire way you should be thinking about job offers, salaries, and what your time is actually worth. By the end of this, you might look at that long commute very, very differently. The hidden tax nobody talks about. Let's start with the most obvious costs, just to get them on the table, because even the obvious ones are bigger than most people realize. The average American commuter spends about 27 minutes each way to get to work. That sounds manageable, right? Half an hour, fine. But that's 54 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Over the course of a full work year, roughly 225 working days, that's 225 hours. 225 hours. That's more than 9 full 24-hour days. Or if we're being more realistic about waking hours, that's like 15 to 16 full days of your conscious, living, breathing life just gone, spent sitting in a car or standing on a platform. And that's the average. If you're commuting an hour each way, which millions of people are, you're talking about 500 hours a year, over 20 days of your life, just to get to work and back. But okay, time is abstract. Let's talk about the thing that's harder to ignore: money. The most commonly cited figure for the cost of driving is the IRS mileage rate, which hovers around 67 cents per mile when you factor in gas, depreciation, insurance, and maintenance. If you're driving 15 miles each way, which is pretty typical, that's 30 miles a day, 7,500 miles a year, and at 67 cents a mile, you're spending about $5,000 just on the driving itself. And that's before you pay for parking, which in any mid-sized city can run you $100 to $300 a month. So now we're potentially at $6,000 to $8,000 a year, just to physically get to the office. If you take public transit, it's a bit different, but not necessarily cheaper once you add it all up. A monthly Metro card in New York is $132. In Boston, a monthly pass runs about $90. Chicago, around $105. And these prices have been creeping up every year. So even transit commuters are often spending $1,000 to $1,500 a year on fares alone. And here's the thing most people never factor in: the cost of the convenience habits the commute creates. You know what I mean. The coffee you grab at the station because you didn't have time to make it at home. The lunch you buy near the office because you couldn't pack one. The dinner you order on the way home because you're exhausted and it's already 7 p.m. and cooking feels impossible. These aren't extravagances, they're survival mechanisms, but they cost money, real money. We're talking potentially $10 to $20 a day in small, invisible expenses that you would never spend if you were just home. That's another $2,500 to $5,000 a year. Add it all up, and a typical commuter, not someone with a crazy extreme commute, just a normal, average commuter, is spending somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000 a year on costs directly tied to the act of going to work, and most of them have no idea. Now here's where it gets really interesting. And honestly, this is the part that kind of broke my brain a little when I first worked through it. When we think about salary, we think about what we earn, but what we should be thinking about is what we keep per hour of our lives we spend, and these two numbers are very, very different. Let's say you earn $70,000 a year. After taxes, let's call that roughly $52,000 in take-home pay, depending on your state. You work 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, 2,000 hours. So your effective hourly rate on take-home pay is about $26 an hour. That feels okay, right? But now, let's do this properly. You commute 1 hour each way. That's 10 extra hours a week, 500 hours a year that you're spending in service of your job. Add those to your work hours, and now you're spending 2,500 hours a year on your job. Your $52,000 in take-home pay divided by 2,500 hours is now $20.80 an hour. Then subtract your commuting costs. Let's say $9,000 a year in all-in commute expenses. Now your effective take-home is $43,000. Divide by 2,500 hours, and you're at $17.20 an hour. You started at $26 an hour, and you're actually earning $17.20 an hour. That's a 34% difference. A third of your effective hourly wage just evaporated. Not to taxes, not to bad spending decisions, but to the mechanical act of getting to and from work. And this reframing is so important because it changes the entire calculus of job decisions. A lot of people look at two job offers and compare the salaries, but that's the wrong comparison. You have to compare the effective hourly rate after commute time and commute costs are accounted for. Let me give you a concrete example. Say you have two job offers. Job A pays $80,000 and is 45 minutes away. Job B pays $72,000 and is 10 minutes away. Most people would take Job A without a second thought. It's $8,000 more a year. But let's run the real numbers. Job A. After taxes, let's say $58,000 take-home. Commute adds 375 hours a year. Commute costs roughly $8,500 a year. Effective take-home after commute costs $49,500. Divided by 2,375 total hours, about $20.84 per hour. Job B. After taxes, roughly $52,550 take-home. Commute adds about 83 hours a year. Commute costs roughly $2,500 a year. Effective take-home after commute costs $50,000. Divided by 2,083 total hours, about $24 per hour. Job B, the one that pays $8,000 less on paper, actually puts more money in your pocket per hour of your life and gives you back nearly 300 hours a year. That's 12 and a half full days of your life back. This is not a small thing. This is a decision framework that most people never use, and it costs them, quietly, invisibly, over years. What your time is actually worth. I want to stay on this idea of time for a second, because I think we dramatically undervalue it, and commuting is where that undervaluation hurts the most. There's this concept in economics called opportunity cost, the idea that every choice you make costs you not just what you spent, but what you could have done instead. And when you're spending 500 hours a year commuting, the opportunity cost is enormous. Think about what you could learn in 500 hours. That's enough time to get reasonably proficient in a new programming language, to read 40 or 50 books, to build a side project that might generate income, to take an online course and genuinely develop a skill that could lead to a promotion, a career pivot, or a freelance income. Now, I'm not one of those people who thinks every second of your life needs to be optimized for productivity. That's exhausting and kind of miserable, honestly. Rest is valuable. Staring out a train window is valuable. But there's a difference between choosing to rest and having your rest time involuntarily consumed by a commute that leaves you drained, stressed, and behind on everything. The research on this, by the way, is pretty sobering. Studies have consistently found that commuting is one of the activities people find least enjoyable in their daily lives, ranking lower than work itself, lower than household chores, and obviously lower than social activities or leisure. A long commute is one of the strongest predictors of reduced life satisfaction, not temporarily, chronically. Year over year, people with long commutes report lower well-being, higher stress, worse sleep, and more strained relationships. And yet, when people negotiate salaries, almost nobody accounts for this. They'll negotiate hard over $2,000 in base pay, but accept a 90-minute commute without blinking. The numbers, when you actually run them, suggest this is backwards. The car ownership trap. Here's a related thing that kind of spirals out from all of this: the way commutes forced car ownership and how car ownership is one of the most underappreciated financial drains in the average American's budget. If you live somewhere that requires a car to commute, you're not just paying for the commute, you're paying for the entire infrastructure of car ownership. The car itself, which for a new vehicle averages around $48,000 now, a number that genuinely makes me want to lie down. Insurance, which depending on where you live runs $1,200 to $2,500 a year, registration, inspection, the odd repair, tires every few years, oil changes, the time you spend dealing with all of this. AAA estimates the total annual cost of car ownership at around $10,000 to $12,000 a year for a typical driver, per year. Most people don't internalize this because the costs are spread out and irregular, a big repair bill here, a higher insurance renewal there, so they never feel like one lump sum. But it absolutely is. And here's the cruel irony: a lot of people need their car almost exclusively to commute. They work within a few miles of everything they actually want: restaurants, grocery stores, friends. But because their job is 20 miles away and there's no viable transit, they pay $10,000 a year for a vehicle that serves one primary purpose: getting them to a building and back. If you could eliminate the need for a car, or even go from 2 cars to 1 by changing your job situation or where you live, the financial impact is staggering. We're talking about potentially $10,000 a year in freed up income. Invested over 20 years at a modest return, that's over $500,000. Seriously, the math is not subtle here. The salary negotiation angle nobody teaches you. Okay, so let's say you can't change where you live or where you work right now. That's fine. Most people can't, at least not quickly. But there's something you can do that almost no one thinks to do, which is factor your commute directly into your salary negotiations. Here's the principle. Your commute is a cost of employment. It is money you spend and time you sacrifice specifically because you work for this employer. That cost should be reflected in your compensation. When you're negotiating a salary, you're essentially negotiating the terms of a transaction, your time and skills in exchange for money. But time should mean all the time you give to this job, not just the hours you're sitting at your desk. If you have to spend 10 hours a week commuting, those hours belong to the job. They're gone from the rest of your life because of the job, and the compensation should reflect that. Now, will most employers just hand you extra money because you asked for it framed this way? Not exactly. But here's what it does. It clarifies your bottom line. It tells you what number you actually need to say yes. If you know that your commute costs $8,000 a year and steals 500 hours of your life, you know that any offer needs to be at least $8,000 higher than an equivalent remote or near-home role to break even. That's your floor. That's the number you negotiate from. And in negotiations, knowing your floor is everything. Most people walk in with a vague feeling that they want a bit more. The person who walks in knowing exactly what their time and costs are worth walks out with a better deal almost every time. There's also the question of remote work flexibility. Every day you work from home is a day you don't commute. If your commute costs $35 all in, which is totally realistic when you factor everything, then 2 days working from home is worth about $3,500 a year. That's not nothing. That's a gym membership, a couple of vacations, a solid chunk of a car payment. When negotiating, remote workdays should be on the table as a form of compensation because financially, that's exactly what they are. What about, but I use the time well? All right, I want to address this because it always comes up, but I listen to podcasts on my commute. I use the time. It's actually kind of nice. And look, I get it. I really do. There's something almost meditative on certain kinds of commutes. A quiet train ride, a familiar drive, that transitional space between home and work that lets your brain shift gears. It's not nothing. But here's the honest question. Is commuting the best way to get that? Because you could listen to podcasts while making breakfast, or on a walk, or while doing something that's actually good for your body. You could use your train time for any number of things. The commute didn't give you the podcast habit. You could have that habit anyway. The commute is the tax, and the podcast is what makes the tax bearable. Those are different things. The research backs this up. Studies show that commuters who report using the time productively still show lower well-being than people with short commutes, even when controlling for other factors. The mental load of navigating traffic or transit, the physical discomfort, the way it compresses your morning and evening, these costs exist, whether or not you're also managing to get through your audiobook backlog. I'm not saying your commute is worthless. I'm saying don't let the coping mechanism trick you into thinking the problem isn't real. There's a bigger, slower-moving thing happening underneath all of this that I think is worth naming. Over the last few decades, housing prices in city centers, close to where most jobs are, have absolutely exploded. The response for a lot of people has been to move further out, further from the city, further from the office, into places where housing is more affordable. And this makes sense on the surface. You're saving $500 or $1,000 a month on rent, great. But what you're often doing without quite realizing it is trading housing savings for commute costs. The math doesn't always work out the way people hope. Let's say you move 30 miles further from the city and save $700 a month on rent, $8,400 a year. Sounds great. But now you're driving 60 miles a day instead of 10. That's about 12,500 extra miles a year. At 67 cents a mile, that's $8,375 more in driving costs. You've basically broken even, but your commute is now 60 to 90 minutes each way instead of 20, and you're giving up hundreds of additional hours of your life per year. The housing versus commute trade-off is one of the most consequential financial decisions most families make, and it's almost never analyzed rigorously at the time they make it. People fall in love with a house, they do the rent math, they don't do the commute math, and they end up in a situation that doesn't actually serve them financially or personally as well as they thought. The people who get this right, and I've seen this pattern over and over, tend to be the ones who either live close to where they work or who negotiate genuine flexibility about where they work. Either solution addresses the core problem, but the solution has to be intentional. It doesn't just happen. The quiet compound effect. I want to close this main section by talking about something that doesn't get discussed nearly enough, which is the compounding financial impact of commute costs over a career. We've established that a typical commuter might spend $8,000 to $12,000 a year on commuting costs. Let's use $10,000 as a round number. Over a 35-year career, that's $350,000 just spent on getting to work. Not on experiences, not on assets, not on investments, on logistics. But it gets worse when you think about the opportunity cost of that money. $10,000 a year invested in a basic index fund, earning a historical average of around 7% annually after inflation, over 35 years becomes approximately $1.4 million. $1.4 million. That is the financial cost of a long commute over a career, when you account for what that money could have become instead. Now, obviously, this is a theoretical exercise. Most people can't simply redirect their commute costs into investments. You still need to get to work somehow. But the point isn't that the math is perfectly achievable. The The point is that it illustrates the scale of the cost. We're talking about a life-altering sum of money that evaporates quietly in traffic over the course of a career. Even small reductions matter enormously. If you can cut your commute costs in half through a closer job, a more fuel-efficient car, more remote days, or negotiating a transit stipend, the long-term financial impact is genuinely significant. This is not about being extreme or unrealistic. It's about understanding what's actually at stake. So, what do you actually do with this? Okay, we've done a lot of math together, and I don't want this to just be a video that makes you feel bad about your commute with nowhere to go. So let me be practical for a minute. The first thing is just to actually calculate your real number, not a vague estimate, the real, complete cost. Write down your gas or transit costs, add parking, add the wear on your car using the IRS mileage rate, add the daily convenience spending that the commute creates, add up the hours, convert those hours to a dollar figure using your effective hourly rate. That is your commute's true annual cost. Most people have never done this, and once you do, it changes things. The second thing is to factor this into every job decision going forward. Before you compare salaries, compare effective hourly rates. Account for commute time and commute costs in the calculation. A lower-paying job might genuinely be the better financial decision, and even if it isn't, you'll know exactly why you're accepting the trade-off. The third thing is to negotiate for it. Ask for remote workdays. Even 1 or 2 a week makes a real difference. Ask for a transit stipend, which many employers offer but don't advertise. Ask for flexible start and end times that let you commute during off-peak hours, which reduces both time and stress. These are reasonable asks, and the worst anyone can say is no. And the fourth thing, the big, slower one, is to let this inform your longer-term decisions about where you live and what kind of work you pursue. Not because you need to overhaul your life tomorrow, but because the commute question, when you look at it clearly, is one of the most leveraged financial questions in your life. Small improvements compound dramatically over time. Coming home. You know, I think about that person at the beginning of this video, the one who got the raise and couldn't figure out where the money went, and I think about how common that experience is, how many people are working really hard, making reasonable decisions, and still feeling stuck. A lot of the time, the money isn't going to bad choices or reckless spending. It's going to the invisible infrastructure of modern working life. The commute is one of the biggest pieces of that. It's so normalized that nobody questions it. It's just the thing you do. You get up, you drive, you sit in traffic, you arrive, you work, you drive back. Day after day, year after year. But normal doesn't mean free. Normal doesn't mean cheap, and normal definitely doesn't mean it can't be questioned. The math here is not complicated. The costs are real, the time is real, and unlike a lot of financial problems, this one is actually solvable. Maybe not all at once, maybe not completely, but meaningfully, with some clear thinking, some intentional decisions, and maybe a few honest conversations with an employer. You earned that salary, all of it, and the more of it you actually get to keep, in your account, in your pocket, in your time, the more it starts to feel like the raise was worth something after all. I'm Emmy. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If this gave you a new way of thinking about your work and your money, share it with someone who's got a long drive ahead of them. They might need to hear this. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.